There is a comfortable lie we tell ourselves about the countryside. We imagine that trading the concrete grid for a sleepy regional dot on the map instantly cures modern fatigue. We picture sun-drenched verandas, quiet morning air, and a slower, kinder pace of existence. Is a powerful multi-million-dollar marketing myth the ultimate Australian tree change fantasy sold to anyone exhausted by city mortgages and highway gridlock? But behind the picture postcard brochures and the glossy tourism boards lies an entirely different reality. Across the continent, there are settlements that look charming, exotic, or adventurous from a distance, yet trap their residents in systemic isolation, crushing economic stagnation, and punishing physical environments. These are places where the landscape itself seems hostile to human habitation, where industries have collapsed, or where sheer geography acts as an invisible prison wall, which towns hide profound misery behind their stunning exteriors. And more importantly, what kind of psychological endurance does it take to call these places home when the romantic glow finally fades? Let's take a journey across the map to expose 9 deceptive Australian settlements that look picturesque on paper, but are absolute psychological traps for the people stuck living there. For decades, the narrative of regional migration has been framed as a simple escape hatch. Hack the car, head for the wide open spaces, and find yourself. But that narrative conveniently leaves out the brutal machinery of what happens when you strip away infrastructure, economic diversity, and social support networks. When a town's primary economic engine stalls, or when the climate pushes back with merciless fury, the romantic veneer vanishes overnight. High unemployment, crippling climate extremes, social friction, and profound isolation turn seemingly harmless dots on the map into places of quiet desperation. To understand these settlements, we have to look past the drone footage and the tourist guides. We have to examine the cold economics, the environmental weight, and the psychological toll of living on the margins of a vast, unforgiving continent. Our first stop takes us far below the surface of the South Australian desert, where the only way to survive the day is to live like a mole. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Welcome to Coober Pedy, the opal capital of the world, where the surface of the earth looks less like a place for human settlement and more like a dry, unmapped crater on Mars. This is a blinding, dust-choked desert wasteland where summer temperatures routinely smash past 50 degrees Celsius. To stay alive in a heat so ferocious it can warp car bumpers, residents don't turn on air conditioning, they retreat underground. Over half the population lives in dugouts, subterranean cave systems hand-carved into the sandstone hillsides. Inside these subterranean homes, the temperature remains a steady, comfortable 24 degrees year-round, shielded from the blistering outback sun. But living in a cave comes with a profound psychological cost. Imagine waking up every single day to absolute silence, zero natural sunlight in your living room, and walls of raw sandstone. The median property price here sits at around 50,000 Australian dollars, which sounds like a bargain until you realize you are paying for it with your vitamin D levels and your connection to the outside world. Water cannot simply be tapped from a local reservoir. It must be pumped via an expensive, high-maintenance, long-distance pipeline from the distant River Murray. The town exists in a perpetual, unstable boom and bust cycle driven by opal mining. When a strike hits, fortunes are made overnight. When it doesn't, the town feels like an abandoned movie set waiting for a tumbleweed. There are no sprawling green parks here, no leafy canopies, and no natural shade. Your entire horizon is a sea of red dust and jagged mullock heaps left behind by desperate miners. How do people keep from losing their minds when their entire world is a cave and a dust storm? The answer is grit, adaptation, and a stubborn refusal to leave. But if Coober Pedy buries you alive in the earth, our next destination traps you beneath a relentless, weeping sky. Queenstown, Tasmania. Leave the subterranean caves of South Australia far behind and head south, across the Bass Strait, into the rugged, storm-battered mountains of Western Tasmania. Here lies Queenstown, a surreal, post-apocalyptic lunar basin that looks like something out of a dark science fiction epic. For over a century, intensive copper smelting stripped the surrounding mountains entirely bare. The toxic sulfur dioxide fumes killed every living plant, and decades of relentless rainfall melted the exposed topsoil straight down to naked, rust-colored rock. Today, annual rainfall in this basin tops a staggering 2,400 millimeters. You do not visit Queenstown to soak up the sun, you visit to watch mist cling to skeletal, blood-red hills under a bruised, weeping sky. The psychological weight of this place is heavy and suffocating. The town is locked inside a narrow mountain valley connected to the rest of the island by a tortuous, winding road network that snakes through unforgiving wilderness. Median house prices sit comfortably under $180,000, but the cheap real estate attracts people fleeing financial ruin only to find themselves swallowed by isolation and perpetual dampness. Everything here feels slightly damp, slightly rusted, and profoundly distant from the mainland buzz. Yet there is a haunting, gothic beauty to the ecosystem fighting back. Ferns and stubborn scrub are slowly reclaiming the barren slopes, turning the rust-colored hills into a bizarre canvas of ecological recovery. But can a community truly thrive when its entire backyard looks like a battlefield of the Industrial Revolution? From the rusted mountains of the Deep South, we now cross the entire continent to the blazing, mineral-rich iron ore capital of the North. Newman, Western Australia. Tucked deep into the red dirt of the Pilbara region is Newman, a hyper-controlled, sterile company town built for one explicit purpose: extracting the Earth's riches and shipping them across the Pacific. Built entirely by Mount Whaleback iron ore operations, Newman is a masterclass in corporate urban planning and corporate isolation. Summer temperatures here regularly smash past 45 degrees Celsius, turning the outdoors into an open-air convection oven. To cope, the entire town operates inside a massive air-conditioned fishbowl. The houses, the shopping centers, the recreation facilities, and the vehicles are locked in a perpetual battle against the furnace outside. But the real trap in Newman isn't the heat, it's the lack of genuine community history. Almost every single resident is a transient economic tenant: fly-in, fly-out workers, mining contractors, and corporate managers on rotation. Real estate is dominated by company housing, meaning your home, your neighbor, and your local grocery store are all tied directly to the balance sheet of a mining conglomerate. Walk down the street and you'll notice an eerie, almost unsettling cleanliness. There are no ancient local institutions, no generational families who remember when the dirt was just dirt. Everything is functional, efficient, and utterly temporary. When you live inside a corporate bubble surrounded by thousands of square kilometers of lethal, waterless desert, the psychological barrier between you and coastal civilization feels insurmountable. What happens to a town's soul when every single person around you is just marking time until their contract ends? That sterile corporate perfection stands in stark contrast to our next location, located on the dusty, lawless tracks of northern New South Wales. Lightning Ridge, New South Wales. Welcome to Lightning Ridge, the chaotic, unpermitted global capital of black opal mining. If Newman is a pristine corporate boardroom, Lightning Ridge is the wild, untamed backyard where the rules simply do not apply. Defined by makeshift shacks, winding red dirt tracks, and an outright rejection of standard municipal council oversight, this town is a haven for independent miners, free spirits, dropouts, and survivalists. People come here to escape the pressures of modern bureaucratic society, staking out claims under an anarchic patchwork of old mining laws. Architecture here is entirely DIY: corrugated iron, reclaimed timber, and buses converted into bedrooms sitting haphazardly across the arid landscape. But freedom comes with a severe price tag. Chronic water security struggles plague the region, and basic municipal infrastructure like paved roads, robust drainage, and modern sanitation are often treated as optional suggestions. The summer heat is punishing, and the social fabric is frayed by the very nature of the population. A revolving door of hardened prospectors and transient hopefuls looking to strike it rich before their luck runs out. The emotional hook of Lightning Ridge is an unsettling sense of absolute social disorder. It is a place where you can live completely off the grid, but you do so at the mercy of the elements and your own resilience. How does a community survive when basic government safety nets and building codes simply do not exist? Leaving the anarchic opal fields behind, we travel toward the Spencer Gulf to inspect an industrial ghost port caught in transition. Port Augusta, South Australia. Port Augusta sits at the crossroads of the nation, a gritty transport bottleneck that highway drivers speed past as fast as humanly possible on their way to somewhere else. Once a proud industrial anchor powered by massive coal-fired power stations, the town has spent the last decade grappling with a painful identity crisis. When the historic power stations were shut down, the local economy took a devastating hit. Today, median property prices in Port Augusta are among the lowest in regional South Australia, but cheap homes have not translated into an influx of thriving families. Instead, the town struggles with elevated crime rates per capita, high unemployment, and the quiet despair of a municipality left behind by modern economic shifts. The psychological curse of Port Augusta is simple. It is a town where nobody stays. It is a transit hub, a place you stop for petrol and a quick coffee before hitting the Stewart Highway North or the Air Highway West. The decaying industrial ruins along the waterfronts serve as a constant, looming reminder of better days that are never coming back. Local leaders fight hard to pitch the town as a future green energy capital, leveraging its immense sun and wind potential, but the transition has been agonizingly slow for the people currently living through the fallout. There is a profound loneliness in living inside a place defined entirely by the cars speeding past your rearview mirror. Can an old industrial hub successfully reinvent itself, or is it permanently locked in a downward spiral? From the highway junctions of South Australia, we head deep into New South Wales to a river town trapped in deep historical grief, Wilcannia, New South Wales. On the banks of the once mighty Darling River sits Wilcannia, a location that bears the scars of deep systemic neglect. In the 19th century, this is the third largest port on the Darling River, a bustling inland hub where grand 19th century sandstone public buildings rose to symbolize the boundless wealth of the colonial wool trade. Today, those magnificent stone buildings stand like architectural ghosts surrounded by modern decay. Wilcannia is crushed by severe socioeconomic disadvantage and chronic water security issues that have frequently left its river system choked, dry, or poisoned by algal blooms. The visual contrast is heartbreaking. You can walk past a heritage-listed courthouse built to last 1,000 years, only find contemporary community infrastructure starved of funding and basic support. The psychological weight here is heavy with sorrow and frustration. The ecological strangulation of the Darling River didn't just kill the local fishing and agricultural industries, it severed the deep cultural and economic lifeline of the community. Mainstream Australia often suffers from historical amnesia, forgetting that inland river towns ever existed until a major crisis hits the nightly news. Why do institutions fail places like Wilcannia with such predictable regularity? And can a town with such rich, complex history ever reclaim the lifeblood that made it famous? That question hangs heavy as we pack our bags and head deep into the furnace of the Northern Territory. Tennant Creek. Northern Territory Tennant Creek is not a place you visit for a holiday. It is a brutal outback highway transit stop where the Stewart and Barclay highways collide in a shimmer of shimmering asphalt and relentless heat. Infamous for spiking crime rates, stifling seasonal temperature swings, and a transient population constantly rolling through on long-haul road trips, Tennant Creek is a crucible of outback friction. The town exists primarily as a logistical node, a fuel stop, a police district outpost, and a supply point for distant cattle stations. But for the people who live here permanently, the environment is intensely volatile. The psychological strain comes from the constant collision between transient travelers, tourists, backpackers, and truck drivers, and a local population dealing with generational disadvantage and inadequate support services. Walking down the main street, you feel the tension in the air. It is an uneasy, hyper-vigilant atmosphere where the romanticized Australian road trip fantasy grinds hard against the gritty, unvarnished struggles of outback reality. Repeated government intervention programs have cycled through Tennant Creek over the decades, promising reform, safety, and economic stabilization, yet the core issues persistently return once the political spotlight fades. Why do these well-funded programs continually fail to anchor the town? To find our next contrast, we must leave the northern heat behind and make a final jump to the damp, wild southern coast of Tasmania, Strahan. Strahan is a stunningly isolated fishing and tourism port nestled on the edge of Macquarie Harbour on Tasmania's wild west coast. With a permanent population hovering around 600, the town is bordered on all sides by the impenetrable, mist-shrouded Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. From the outside, it looks like a tranquil sanctuary for nature lovers, but living in Strahan means submitting to the raw fury of the Southern Ocean. Relentless winds, horizontal rain, and months of unbroken winter storms slam against the coast, driving residents indoors for weeks at a time. The town is connected to the rest of the island by narrow, winding mountain roads that can easily be cut off by landslides, weather events, or fires. The psychological weight to Strahan is one of absolute edge-of-the-map claustrophobia. You are hemmed in by water on one side, and an ancient, dense, unyielding rainforest on the other. Just across the harbour lies Sarah Island, the ruins of one of the most brutal and inescapable penal colonies in British imperial history. The ghosts of that harsh past seem to linger in the damp air, reminding anyone who stays too long that this coast was never meant to be easily conquered. How do residents cope with months of winter isolation and zero viable highway alternatives? They rely on each other, developing a tight-knit, fiercely independent community spirit that looks out for its own when the outside world is blocked off. Our final stop takes us from a damp southern inlet to a sterile corporate tourist enclosure sitting right beside Australia's most famous desert monolith. Yulara, Northern Territory deep in the red heart of the continent, just a stone's throw from Uluru, sits Yulara. On a map, it looks like a convenient town designed to service travelers visiting the spiritual centre of Australia. In reality, Yulara is a sterile, master-planned resort enclave built entirely to quarantine tourists away from the messy realities of the outback. Owned and operated under strict corporate and tourism management frameworks, Yulara has no genuine organic civic culture. There are no generational residents here, no local families building a long-term community. Almost everyone you meet is a hospitality worker, a resort manager, or a tour guide on a short-term contract, living in staff quarters before packing their bags and disappearing back to the capital cities. The psychological irony of Yulara is profound. You are standing in the most spiritually significant landscape in the country, yet you are trapped inside an air-conditioned resort bubble complete with resort pricing, souvenir shops, and corporate hospitality standards. It is a town designed entirely as a hotel lobby for a rock. What is it like to live in a community where every single person you interact with is guaranteed to be gone in 72 hours? It breeds a strange, transient detachment of place where human connections are ephemeral, fleeting, and transactional. When you step back and look at these 9 settlements across the Australian continent, a striking pattern emerges. Whether they are subterranean cave towns in South Australia, rusted industrial basins in Tasmania, corporate mining bubbles in the Pilbara, or sterile resort enclosures in the desert, they share a common thread. They expose the dark mirror of our regional fantasies. While mainland capitals suffocate under housing crises and urban sprawl, these remote and regional corners offer an alternative, but it is an alternative built on extreme isolation, economic vulnerability, and environmental hardships. They remind us that the landscape doesn't care about our romantic ideals of escape. It extracts a price from everyone who tries to tame it. Which of these 9 deceptive towns would you least want to be stranded in when your luck runs out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, the postcard never tells you the whole story.